Why does the Army War College conduct these annual strategy conferences?
Well, the Army War College considers itself the Army Center for Strategic Thought. And as you point out, for the last quarter century, every year, we gather together a group of experts to discuss the most perplexing and complicated national security issues facing our nation, and particularly that involve U.S. Army interests. And so this year is a continuation of that long tradition of conducting conferences of this nature. And it's an ideal venue for us to bring together the absolute best experts around the United States and very often from abroad, and bring their expertise to bear on critical national security issues and national military strategy issues at a relatively very low cost to the United States Army. So it's a highly leveraged event that attracts a great deal of expertise and allows us to bring it to bear on the issues that are most important to the Army leadership.
Professor Lovelace, this year's theme is going to be balancing the joint force for future security challenges. Why is that the right topic for this year's conference?
Because from time to time, the United States finds itself at strategic inflection points when it needs to relook its national security strategy and its national security objectives and the environment within which it pursues its objectives and tries to implement its strategy. We find ourselves now in another inflection point where, but this one is probably more complex than those before us. Of course, all of those before us who wrestled with their complex issues would say theirs was more complex than the one before them also. But I think that we can make a good case that challenges are more complex now, because we're not only dealing with a new view toward what it takes to provide U.S. national security, but we're dealing with that with a widespread acceptance that we have to reduce the defense spending in this nation. What we want to focus on this conference, given that we have already received the Defense Strategic Guidance in 2012, we know what the Strategic Choices Management Review is going to tell us about the national security predispositions of the current administration, and we have a pretty good idea, or we'll know for certain within a month, what the Quadrennial Defense Review says as far as the national security objectives are concerned and the strategic concepts for achieving them. Now what we need to know is what type of a military do we need to put those documents into, to give them real. We thought this is the perfect time to talk about what type of U.S. Armed Forces that we need in the future. And we're not talking about an Army or a Navy or an Air Force or a Marine Corps. We're talking about the Joint Force, because it only makes sense to address this particular issue from a joint concept, because it takes the entire Joint Force to provide the military capabilities that the nation needs going forward into the future.
What are some of those key debates you see playing out, maybe one or two of them that you'd like to highlight in particular, and maybe some of the implications then for the Army and the Joint Force?
Well, of course, the conference is kind of centered around somewhat of a geographic orientation, in that we can't avoid the rebalancing of U.S. national security policy toward the Asia-Pacific while keeping an eye on the Middle East. But there's also the rest of the world that we need to keep an eye on, and that could surprise us. So there is a kind of a geographic orientation of the conference. But there's also other underlying themes, underlying trends. In other words, one of them, for example, could be this notion that mass armies are becoming obsolete, that we're not going to fight any large land wars anywhere in the world, especially in Asia, the North Korea notwithstanding. And you have that notion juxtaposed against the notion that we can manage the international security environment through precision strikes or direct action by special forces. A third idea kind of goes along with the notion of precision strike managing the international security environment, is that we can do it through an offshore balancing concept, where we don't need to provide the land forces. We provide the standoff strikes that we'll use indigenous land forces of various countries within the region to actually fight the land wars rather than ourselves. So you have all of those factors that are combining to make this a very complex era of examination in U.S. national security policy, and the size and the composition of the forces that are needed to help implement the policy.